Welcome once more, ladies and gentlemen, to yet another episode of AskOkey. Today we're going to talk about lapel, more specifically lapel fit and proportion. We're going to talk about why lapel size matters. We're going to talk about balance and visual appeal. And then we're going to talk about classic lapel width. What and why do we have a classic width? We're going to talk about proportion and balance, width of the lapel, gorge height, and lapel length. We're going to talk about fit, how your lapel should fit while the coat is on you. And finally, we're going to conclude with a recap of everything we've talked about. So let's get to the start. Why lapel size matters, balance and visual appeal. Now, we're all shaped differently. We come in different shapes and sizes, height, width, shoulder width, torso width, and so on and so forth. And the idea behind proportion and balance is to ensure that your garments are visually appealing. And how do you achieve this? You achieve this by manipulating all the elements of your clothing, be it the jacket or the trousers or a coat or anything, or even a dress for women. You visually manipulate the proportions of your dress to suit your specific stature. And that's why we do bespoke, or that's why we go bespoke or custom. Because with custom or bespoke tailoring, you're able to better capture proportions or sort of portray your body in its best light. And so that is why lapel size matters. Again, to re-emphasize, lapel size matters, meaning this is the lapel of your coat. Lapel size matters to ensure balance and visual appeal. Now, let's go on to a classic lapel width. What is a classic lapel width? Classically, lapel width is about 3.5 inches wide. So measured from the tip of the lapel all the way to the inside. About 3.5 inches, or about 9 centimeters, if my conversion is correct. This is the recommended lapel width for most people, or the average person. Well, we're not all average. And so the beauty of custom tailoring or bespoke tailoring is that it allows you to adjust the proportions of your dress to your own unique features. For instance, I'm a fairly broad-chested fellow. And so the 3.5-inch rule may not necessarily work for me because I have very broad shoulders. And so the idea when designing my own clothes is to ensure the lapel width suits my particular frame, my wide torso, or sort of a wide chest and wide shoulders. Now, here's a rule of thumb. Your lapel should travel about halfway, roughly halfway, between the edge of your lapel and your shoulder seam, approximately halfway. Now, the Italians tend to go slightly wider. It's a bit more of a contemporary cut. Some would say a bit more flashy. And so they tend to exceed that center line by a little bit, but not by too much. You don't want your lapel so wide that they're touching your shoulders. It looks like a caricature, and you don't want that. So again, classic lapel width, about 3.5 inches, or about 9 centimeters, and visually, the lapel should travel about halfway, the edge of the lapel that is, should travel about halfway between the inside of the lapel and your shoulder seam. Now, let's move on to proportion and balance. We've talked about width, about how wide it should be. We talked about it in the classic width. Again, width all comes down to your personal proportions or your size or your dimensions. Like I said, I'm a fairly broad-chested fellow, wide shoulders, so I would require, my lapels would call for something wider than the standard 3.5 inches. So I have on a coat, which is a Neapolitan jacket made for me by my Neapolitan tailor. This jacket measures approximately 4.25 inches across. About 4.25 inches, which is a good 0.75 inches wider than your classic 3.5 inches. And this is to accommodate, of course, my broader chest and my wider shoulders. Now, it's still considered fairly forward. In our AskOkey classic jacket, which I designed myself, the lapels are slightly more tame than this. And you will see it when we come to our AskOkey coats. Now, let's talk about gorge height. This is your gorge right here. Your gorge is where the collar of the coat meets the lapel itself. The little indent here, this is your gorge. And the gorge line cuts right across. That's your gorge line. Now, again, it's an argument or debate between sort of a more contemporary approach versus classic approach. We see gorges these days, which actually, quite frankly, are comical, that literally sit on the shoulders. That is very, quote-unquote, Italian and fashion-forward. Whereas classic gorge heights tend to be a bit lower. And the rule of thumb I use is that your gorge, the gorge should be at some point at or slightly below the knot of your tie. So if you use the knot of your tie as a parallel line, your gorge line should just about be even or even slightly lower. So this is a Neapolitan jacket and the gorge is fairly high. Not too high, but fairly high. Bit higher than I would like it for my own classic, for our own AskOkey classic jacket. So again, this is a gorge line. Now, why is this important? The gorge line essentially raises the height or the visual height of the lapel. It brings the eye of the onlooker closer to your face and it gives an illusion of height. And so for those who are vertically challenged or shorter, to be more specific, a higher gorge tends to make you look somewhat taller because it gives you a bit more of an imposing figure, which means the lapel is slightly wider and in most cases longer. And we'll talk about the length of the lapel. This gives an illusion of height. Whereas if you're fairly tall, I'm 6 foot tall, slightly above 6 foot tall, I do not need to communicate the illusion of height because I already have some height. And so for me, I prefer a more classic gorge by bringing the gorge slightly lower, like I said again, at or about the level of the knot of my tie. In other words, slightly below my collarbone. This becomes even more important with double-breasted jackets. And we see on Instagram and sort of in the contemporary media today, you often see some of these double-breasted jackets with the lapels literally shooting above the shoulder line. That is just comical. Do not do that. Don't do that, guys, or don't do that, ladies and gentlemen. Your lapel should not shoot above your shoulder. It looks like an elf's ears. You don't want that. So the idea behind classic proportions with your gorge is that it ensures that the peak of your double-breasted lapel sits well below your shoulder line when being observed from the front. So that is gorge height. Let's talk about lapel length. Lapel length is the distance, of course, from the top of the lapel all the way to the bottom, typically to the waist button, which is where you ought to button your coats. That is where the lapel technically ends. Again, the length of the lapel begins right at the edge of the lapel and it travels all the way down to your waist button. That is your lapel length. Going back again to the illustration using gorge height, lapel length can be used to manipulate sort of visual proportion. For shorter gentlemen, or sort of for more diminutive gentlemen, a longer lapel offers a sweeping line, and that sweeping line gives the illusion of height from a distance. Again, I repeat, a longer lapel line gives the illusion of height from a distance. And so if you're diminutive or vertically challenged, a longer lapel actually flatters you more. However, if you do not have that challenge of height, Then you can actually go with a shorter lapel. And if you're exceedingly tall, for instance, then you want to minimize your lapel length. You want to bring your gorge significantly lower, and you want to keep the lapel length fairly short to minimize your torso, or the height or the length of your torso. And so that is lapel length. Now, let's talk about fit. How should a lapel fit? I'm going to put this down for a second. I come back here. How should a lapel fit? When you button your coat, as I have done, well, you should all know that when you button your coat, it should not pull at the waist. Otherwise, it's just too tight. So it should be free enough that you are able to insert a fist in there between a button coat and your body. So that's one. But more importantly, how should the lapel fit? When you put on your coat and you button it that way, the lapel should lie flat on your chest. Should lie completely flat on your chest. It must not buckle or gape. If it buckles or gapes, it just means that the chest of the coat is too small. It means that the coat has been cut too small, and you need a lot more room or drape in the chest. Again, this is not so much a function of the lapel as it is the cut across the chest. And so when you put on a coat and you notice for any reason the lapel is either bowing out or buckling for any reason, it just means that the coat is too small across your chest. And so you need to either go one size up, or if you're being tailored, you need some more room in the chest to accommodate the lapel, and so the lapel lies flat on your chest. Again, a closer look from the side. The lapel should lie flat and roll into your waist button. Flat and rolling into your waist button very elegantly and seamlessly. There shouldn't be any ruffling or any abnormalities. It should just lie very, very simply, and it should allow you to move and make exaggerated moves without the lapel buckling out of place. So that is fit. And so that's about it. We've talked about gorge height. We've talked about classic lapel width and height. And we've talked about balance, proportion, and fit. So we're done with the technical, so to speak. And so what we're going to do, we're going to try out a number of these coats. I have a single-breasted jacket on. We're going to try on a double-breasted jacket on and actually measure the proportion or the width just to reinforce some of the things I said earlier in my prepared remarks. So without further ado, we're going to try on, this is a single-breasted coat. You've seen it from the front, you've seen it from the side. We're now going to try on a double-breasted jacket and look at the same dimensions and then see the difference between the width and balance of a single-breasted jacket or coat versus a double-breasted jacket. So if you would follow me, I'm going to try on a navy hopsack classic double-breasted blazer. I'm going to put this, I'm going to lay this down here. We'll pick this up. And we put it on. And ladies and gentlemen, this is the proper way to put on your jacket. You hold it behind you, you slip your arms into it, and then you hoist it over your shoulder. And that way you preserve the jacket. You know, a lot of folks put their jacket on one arm at a time. And what happens often is that when you do that, you're stretching the armhole of the jacket. And surely, soon enough, you're going to stretch out the armhole of the coat, and then it's not going to fit as properly as it should. And so to preserve the integrity of the coat, you should always put your coat on like this. Either you have someone hold it out for you behind you, your significant other, or girlfriend, or wife, or whatever, or boyfriend, or valet, should hold it behind you, and then you slip in your arms, and then you hoist it over your back at once. So there we have it. So what do we have here? We have a very classic hopsack double-breasted blazer. Just as classic as it gets. Simple, no frills, brass buttons, just a very classic cut. Nothing exaggerated, simple proportions, classic proportions. I'm going to button this up. There we have it. So there we have it. That's a classic blazer, very classic blazer. Here the lapel width. If you will excuse me, I'll use a tape. I've used the similar proportions for all my jackets, so I'm going to bring out a similar double-breasted blazer, a summer version of it. I'm going to place it here. And I'm going to measure the distance across from the edge of the lapel to the inside of the lapel. So we measure this, and here we have about 5.5 inches, roughly. So we have about 5.5 inches across from here to here. And those proportions are consistent with the proportions of the blazer that I have on, because they're made, I believe, from the same pattern, just a different design and different cloth. So there you have it. It's about 5.5 inches. Now, the rule of traveling halfway across your chest certainly doesn't apply to a double-breasted jacket, because the double-breasted lapel by default should be wider. It's part of the appeal of a double-breasted jacket, is that imposing feel, that imposing lapel. So that's, again, the difference between a single-breasted and a double-breasted. Single-breasted obviously travels just about halfway across your chest or slightly above or slightly beyond. So that's a double-breasted jacket. We're going to measure a single-breasted blazer similar to the one I had on. I'll put this back. And put this up. This is a single-breasted mock lino blazer. It's a summer blazer, just beautiful. You could see, literally, you could see through it. It's unlined. It's a summer blazer made out of mock lino or an open weave. We're going to measure the distance again across the lapel. So if you follow me, I'm going to put my tape here. And here we have just about 4.5 inches. About 4.5 inches. So about a full inch shorter than a double-breasted counterpart. Now, 4.5 inches would be about an inch above the classic width, which we talked about earlier. But like I said again, there are two things going on here. One, these are Neapolitan jackets, which the Neapolitans tend to cut their lapel slightly wider. And also I have a broad torso. I have a broad torso and wide shoulders. And so when you put those together, we're looking at least 0.75 inches to a full inch above and beyond the standard recommended 3.5 inches. So that's it for the measurement. Again, all these jackets here, you're going to find fall in somewhere within those ranges, for my specific proportions. It's going to be somewhere around 4.25 inches and 4.5 inches. And then for you, of course, you have to eyeball your proportion. And a lot of it sometimes is just an art. There is no science to it. It's a combination of what looks right, what looks proportional, what looks balanced, and again, what looks artistic. Because at the end of the day, you don't want a perfunctory looking garment. It should look clinical, yes, but you want to inject a little bit of your personality as well. And so personally, I would err on the side of sort of going above 3.5 inches for a bit more flair. The skinny lapels, of course, are a story of the past. We were plagued with it for many years. Unfortunate as that sounds, thankfully that fad is slowly going away. You know, the skinny lapel, the 3-inch lapels, and then 2.5-inch lapels, that's all garbage. And thankfully we're well beyond that. Again, to recap, the standard width is about 3.5 inches for the average person. If you're very diminutive or very small, maybe 3.25 inches, but I wouldn't recommend going any smaller than 3.25 inches. For the average size person, meaning a man who's about 5, 7, 8, 9 and above, I would say 3.5 inches is the starting point. And then from there on, depending on how much flair you want to inject into your garment, you can go above 3.5. You could do 3.75, 3.75 inches, 4 inches. I mean, I've seen people go as far as 5 inches on a single-breasted coat. That could seem excessive, but then again, it's all about taste and style. So, ladies and gentlemen, that brings us to the end of this segment. I'm going to put this up, and I will end it with our double-breasted coat, whereas I started out with this. So what have we learned today? We've learned about the importance of lapel size and how that influences and affects the balance and proportion. Most importantly, the visual appeal of the garment to an onlooker. We went into the technical aspects. We talked about gorge height. We talked about the length of the lapel. We talked about the width of the lapel. And finally, we talked about the fit of the lapel, how it should lie flat on your chest and not buckle. I did illustrate using the single-breasted jacket, and here we have on the double-breasted jacket, and you can see the same thing. Looking at it from the side, it lies perfectly flat on my chest. It doesn't buckle. It lies flat, perfectly flat, symmetrical. Again, the waist tailored but not pulling. You want just sort of a gentle taper, slight tension on the button, just very slight tension on the button. Don't want it too loose, just slight tension on the button, but not to the extent that the coat starts to pull at your waistline. So that's it. Thank you once more for joining us for yet another episode of AskOkey, and I look forward to seeing you on the next episode. But before I leave, do make sure you hit that subscribe button. Go to our Instagram page, AskOkey IG. Follow us. Be sure to visit our portal at www.askokey.com. Try out our Genie wardrobe tool. A genius, really, in terms of organizing and designing your personal wardrobe. So, and last but not the least, do not forget to join us on our Discord channel, where other members of the AskOkey community exchange information and ideas very freely. With that, I will leave it here, and I will see you on the next episode. Thank you.